All right, how's it going, Jenny?
Good. It's been a long day. Hi, everyone. Sorry I missed the panel. I was trying to get some time to listen to the great stories.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's on live.
It is. It will definitely be online as well for all those. So join the group that we mentioned, and you all get it. So Jenny, why don't you do a quick introduction? As far as geos you invest in, check sizes, how many deals, and your focus as an investor.
Right. So maybe a quick introduction of GGV Capital. GGV Capital, we managed 3.8 billion across the last 17 years. So we were founded in the US at that time with a vision to invest in global markets, US and China. I wanted to do it with one team and from one fund. And so the requirement for our partners is that not only do we need to like planes, we need to be able to sleep on planes when we get into the door. Because part of covering US and China implies that you're going to be doing 12, 14 hours flight on a pretty regular basis. So our latest fund is a 1.2 billion series of funds, which we closed last year, and we started to invest in August. Of the 1.2 billion, as mentioned, we have a 250 million discovery fund. So what that does is the discovery fund allows us to come in very early. So if you are an entrepreneur with a very cool business plan, great team, and doing good stuff within the verticals that we'll focus on, we can write a check as small as a few $100,000, all the way to, with our main fund, we can do 10, 20 million, all the way to 70, 80 million per check. So it allows us to cover multi-stage. It doesn't matter whether you're US or China, but those are the two areas that we're in. We can talk more about the different investment verticals later.
Okay, right on. So the theme of tonight's talk with Jenny, we're going to talk a little about specifically artificial intelligence and her investment thesis in artificial intelligence. As we all know, right now AI has hit some sort of critical mass where just the hype is on overdrive. Every pitch deck we see says, it has actually, I think there's some requirement now, it has to say, according to my machine learning algorithms, or it includes according to blah, 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 deep learning, every pitch it says they're an AI startup. And if you talk to every investor, you say, what's your focus? They're going to mention AI, okay? So Steve says he's the only investor in the whole world. You didn't, but I didn't ask. But I'm sure if I had asked the question, I'm just assuming.
He said it has to go to a mobile phone. I said disintermediation, middle of the tech, and he said, oh.
I don't believe it. Okay, I don't believe it. All right, so the question, Jenny, is do you believe right now that AI is overhyped? And then beyond that what is an AI startup to you? It's, AI, is it like mobile where, a startup, mobile was a platform, right? Is AI the same kind of position that mobile was a few years ago? What is an AI startup? And yeah, talk about hype.
So actually I want to backtrack a little bit. The fundamental of entrepreneurs, can I just check how many of you are founders, startups? And how many of you are service providers? Lawyers, bankers? Not a lot. So and the rest are working for technology companies? Okay. So I think that as a VC, the fundamental things, and I've been a VC for 16 years. Over the 16 years, we've seen a lot of hype. When I first entered VC, it was at the peak of the internet bubble, and I saw it crash. At that time, during the bubble, I was in the Valley where deals were done in 2 weeks, from first meeting to close, and that's a typical Series A. In that time, in 2000, the rage there was anything E, right? You could do e-pads, e-dogs, e-steel, e-cars, e-motors. And again, that was the beginning of the internet wave, which got everybody interested in terms of, what internet can do to create new business model. Now, while the E wasn't much to gloat about, the reality was that it did, spearhead the growth of internet, not just in the US, but also globally, particularly in China as well. In 2000, this was when Sina went public. In 99, Asia Info went public. This was the start of kind of the internet growth in China. So, and then after the E wave, we have a lot of the, O2O wave. We have the Groupon model, which is again, coupon buy, which not just happens in the US, but happens in China again. And then you have the huge mobile wave. And there was a time in 2009 and 2010 when we asked companies and they said, oh, well, mobile startup. What's that? What's a mobile startup, right? So I think today, yes, you can call yourself .ai, you can call yourself an AI-focused company, but I do want to highlight that it doesn't matter what buzzword you use. By the way, before .ai or AI became AI, it used to be called, big data, cloud, SaaS services, data analytics, or predictive analytics, right? So a lot of it is just what you do with the data. So I would encourage that if you're a startup, don't be fixated with the term, because before you know it, as in O2O right now is a dead word, right? 2 years ago, anything O2O is cool, right? Because you want to have your pet service, someone comes to your home to pick up your pet for a wash, like that's the O2O market, right? From food to services, and then today it's a bad word. Companies doing O2O tells me they're doing internet plus services, right? So it's no longer O2O. So get away from the term. I think at the heart of startup, at the heart of every startup, you have to ask yourself, what problem are you trying to solve? Right? The world needs problem solvers, not more .ai. Call it IA, right? So I think yes, it's a little bit of a hype, but I do think that it does. It demonstrates a few growth drivers. It's a convergence of a few growth drivers. Number one, there is huge data explosion, right? And this data is actually structured data, right? In the past, when we may go on PC, we may go on different devices, we're tracking UVs. Those are not specific user data. Today, with mobile penetration, 2 billion smartphones and growing, globally 700-800 million in China. That data that's being captured through our user movement, our user interaction, our transaction on mobile is actually very structured, personalized data that can be used in very different verticals, whether it's when we buy a security product, when we try and pay for our games or virtual items, when you're trying to be live streaming and giving someone a virtual gift or a flower. So in that sense, the fact that it's structured data means that you can start to make sense of it. And so I will come back to saying, if you're looking at your startup, first, what problem are you trying to solve? Is your way of solving this problem unique? Right? If this is open source data and open source algorithms, which are a lot out there, there's a lot of scientists out there, then why are you better? Right? Figure it out. A lot of time, the scenarios that you are in, whether it's medical, education, finance, customer service, and the likes, requires very specific industry knowledge. So you may be using, maybe Barry and I have the same startup, we use the same algorithm, but I may know the financial industry way better. And so I'm able to add a bit more contextual within that environment to allow my data to be a lot better. And so the problem that I can solve may be solved instead with, if you're solving the issue with 10 guys, I may be able to do it with 1, right? So then it's down to, when you solve that problem, are you doing it elegantly? Can you really do it efficiently? And at the end of the day, if it's within the industry, the ROI case has to be very clear, right? You cannot go to a bank and say, now you're using 1,000 guys to do credit card fraud management. If you use my technology, you're just going to use 900. That's not going to work, right? But if you tell them, if you use my technology, you can bring it down to 10. 10 versus 1,000, that's huge improvement. So I think, long story, but that's what we look for. We look for companies, startups, founders with a mission to change the world through solving an issue, not to VC for financing. Because financing comes and goes. At the end, you are on your own, whether you're successful or not. So really coming down to the fundamental issue is key.
Right on. Okay, and so how many AI investments or investments into AI-focused companies have you made? And can you maybe highlight one or two of them that you feel like is doing something especially interesting in AI?
So I'm going to answer that question in a different way. So within GGV, we have different horizons for investments. We look at business models that can change today's dynamic. For example, how e-commerce, verticalization, emergence of internet brands, that's a current market. Right, we talked about, I know we talked about ride sharing, the bicycle sharing, I have a view on that as well. But so on that, the shared economy, for example, that's a market that is right at the start that's coming up. So I think over the next 3 to 5 years, you will see next generation leaders. Then we have what we call a frontier tech sector. So in the frontier tech sector, it's one where we actually look 5 to 10 years out. Right? No one is going to tell us how big those markets are because there's no Goldman Sachs report on it yet. When Goldman comes out with a report, it's too late, right? Or they're wrong. So I think, so coming back, so on frontier tech, we have a couple of areas that we are thinking about. The first area that we've been doing a lot of work on is around the whole transportation. We think that transportation is the next thing after mobile internet, not AI. And how transportation is going to be changed from assisted drive to autonomous drive, from four-wheelers to three-wheelers, two-wheelers, planes, for example. That's an area where I think, again, think about 5 to 10 years out. Changes are happening. Regulations are moving ahead. So that's one big area where there's also AI being applied, if you want to use the word AI. So for autonomous drive, obviously computer vision needs to come in, NLP needs to come in for within car interaction, and then as the car is moving in an autonomous case, obviously you need control and route planning. So we actually look at application scenario, and we think that the autonomous transportation area, who loves auto-flying planes? Who loves the Jacksons? Who grew up with the Jacksons? I mean, in the US, so people should understand me. In China, I'm like, Jacksons, and they're like, no, what's that? But yeah, so it's gonna happen, right? 5 to 10 years out, if we were to hope the world is a better place, I think transportation is gonna change. Just being able to hail a ride from your mobile phone, that's just 0.5. I think when we get to 1.0, 2.0, it's gonna be interesting. So that's one vertical. The second vertical that we look at is the huge robotics area. Robotics is another form of when things start to move and act like human, they are another form of AI, right? So in robotics, we actually exclude cars and planes. So drones and cars has their own transportation area, but within robotics, it's mostly around different scenarios. One, within the home. So in the home situation, we see different types of consumer robotics, whether it's for educational, whether it's for NLP, for communication, for controls, whether it's for medical, nursing applications, so within the home. Second situation is within the services, so for hotels, for restaurants. I think this is one where globally, even in China, the cost of labor has increased 20x in the last 10 years that I've been in China. And so it's no longer enough to, you sit down in a restaurant in China and you have like 5 guys standing there, right? 1 guy taking your order and 4 guys looking. That's not gonna happen, right? Next time you're gonna have, the iPad where you can click your stuff, and there it goes. And your pizza is going to be delivered by a bot that can come in and you have to open up the lid and take the pizza yourself. So I think for services industries as well, we are actually seeing robots being used, not just in the US, but actually in China, in restaurants, in hotels. And then the last area is industrial robots, which I think China is way behind the curve. For those of you who are tracking the robotics industry, there is a matrix that people use globally to assess the level of automation for a country, and that's the basically robot density ratio. So the robot density ratio implies the number of robot that a manufacturing facility use for every 10,000 workers. Right, so you can say, for example, right now the global average globally across all the country is 69. So on average, for every 10,000 workers, on average it's 69. But if you look at the number 1 player out there, so the top 5 countries, the first country out there that's most automated, you want to guess? You want to guess?
Not America.
Germany. Singapore.
No. But these are all top 5.
Korea.
Korea, yes. So Korea is number 1, Japan is number 2, I think Singapore is number 3. Pretty good. Number 4 is Germany, and number 5 is the US. And at the top for Korea, it's over, they are using if I recall right, it's over 520 robots per 10,000 workers. And the US at number 5 is using about 176 or something, precise numbers. This is 2016 numbers. And China is only 49. For a country that churns out over 80% of all the smartphones that you guys are using, maybe 90%, but 70% of all the TV that you are using globally, the country only uses 49 robots per 10,000 workers. So they're way behind the curve, and therefore for industrial robots as well, it's going to change. And I put robotics also has a very classic use case of AI. We don't talk about AI in this, but it's the ultimate when you can have machines replacing humans in the jobs that we may not want to do, 5-10 years from now. So that's the second big area where there's a lot of computer vision that's being used. So if the robots are doing picking, they actually have to identify and be able to pick the products or pack, right? So there's a lot of computer vision. Robots have to move. For those of you who are tracking the AMR space, autonomous mobile robots, where they move warehousing and shelving racks, then this one, they actually have to localize within the factory floor and again, movement. So to do localization movement as well, there's also a lot of 3D reconstruction and localization that needs to happen. So again, a lot of basic application of AI technology. And then last but not least, I think that the part that maybe most investors say, oh, we're looking at AI, is in China, we call it AI plus. Now, I realize that the Chinese government, they're very simple. When they look at internet disrupting traditional industries, it's called internet plus. Get an industry and plus internet, right? So same thing, I think, with the whole wave of AI, people are just saying, hey, it's AI plus. So what does AI plus means? Again, we are lazy people, so we like to use acronyms, right? So AI plus essentially means leveraging whether it's NLP technology for education, or are you using computer vision technology for medical application? So that would be what we call scenario-based, whether it's education or finance or medical or customer service, surveillance, which is most commonly used, right? Those are all verticals where we are seeing core different modules of natural language processing or computer vision or fusion integration that's being done across the vertical. Sorry, I talk for a long time.
Okay, so now we covered
Hopefully it's useful.
transportation, robotics, and was there a third? What was the third category?
So we call it the AI plus.
AI. Okay, AI plus. Okay, got it.
Took me a long time to get to your answer. But
No, actually, you answered like the next three questions,
all
so it's very
startups,
efficient.
it's not the end that matters, it's the process.
Right on. So we did mention a minute ago how really I made a joke about how every startup is saying they're an AI startup. I'd like to know, and I think others in the audience would like to know, what questions do you ask startups to kind of evaluate, what their how deep their AI technology truly is? How much are they really utilizing AI? And or the other side of the question, what do they need to communicate to you that they are more than just a simple AI company? They have really deep technology.
So I mentioned this earlier, right? So what problem are they trying to solve? And how are they solving this problem? Like how efficient? Is it a 10 times difference, 5 times difference, 100 times difference? So that's actually more important than saying, okay, I'm using this algorithm, I'm using this open source, and I'm doing this. So again, I don't think VCs are in the market to invest in the top R&D centers. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's for us, it's about investing in companies that can make a difference. And I love R&D, I love scientists, but at the end of the day, if that research cannot make it out of the lab, none of us can use it. It's no use, right? So I think that's what we will focus on. The second area that we will then look at is whether the entrepreneurs has the right DNA, right? So you can say, hey, I'm a deep AI company, and none of your guys are in the right sector. That means you're going to have to do a lot more to try and hire talent in this area to join you as a founding team. And right now, because of the hype, because of this huge love affair with the whole AI plus category, talent in this category is really expensive. Very expensive right now. I have this saying, I don't know if you guys will agree, that for every AI talent that has years of experience in the industry, not in research, every year is worth 5 million. So if the company has like 5 AI guys with that experience, it's probably valued at like 100 million valuation. Right, so it is bubbly right now. It is talent, and so if you are trying to be a company trying to solve issues, leveraging this technology, and the core DNA of the company is not in this area, and you don't have founders who can get into this talent pool, you're going to start off from a very disadvantaged position.
So that's good advice to all of you. When you're saying, according to my deep learning algorithms, really doesn't matter that much, right? You've got to prove to the team that you have, some true knowledge to back that up, as well, and more importantly, and maybe most importantly, you have to be showing that you actually are solving a problem with your technology. It's not about the technology, it's about the problem you're solving. Really good advice. Okay, so the next question is, you mentioned it. There are relatively few AI experts in the world, relatively few. And actually most of them have already been hired for big bucks by the big tech companies. Additionally, very large tech companies have amazing access to data. They have troves of data. Startups, they're starting from zero. So does that mean that therefore startups are really disadvantaged in this kind of AI space? How can startups compete with these behemoths with amazing talent and amazing data?
It's a good question. I think that the natural inclination is to say the fundamental of AI is that you have to learn, right? So you need data to learn. So in areas where there are core technology, in the areas of language processing, the areas of some basic computer vision, image recognition, I think the large guys with the historical database, I think it's important. That's why today, whether it's Google or Baidu, or Facebook, when you think about, or Apple, right? When you think about NLP, they are ahead, right? That's why Amazon Echo sounds the way it is. That's why Google Home sounds the way it is. But I want to, so if you are a startup that's trying to compete on this core area, then you really, this is hardcore competition. If you are thinking your startup is going to be up for M&As, make sure that the technology route and direction that you choose is in sync with the market. Right? If you're doing something that none of the big guys are doing, they may or may not buy you. Right? So that may be a route that you want to think about, is that if you're in core technology, how do you work with the larger guys? But I would say that the fact that larger guys are there, the fact that NLP is over now, 98% in some cases, accuracy can be achieved, it means that there's a lot of open source technology out there. Open source algorithms, open source ways of doing things. And so as a startup, it's better for you to try and compete within that vertical. So what do I mean by vertical? For example, I'll give you an example. So banks, banks right now have a huge issue with customer service, right? They, whether it's their credit card customers or VIP customers or for loan application, they have huge, customer service team that they need to hire, 1,000s, 2,000 call centers. So they are actively looking at chatbots, right? They are looking for leveraging technology to try and bring this, automate, some of the customer service requests, whether it's inbound or outbound. It's a clear need. Now, any startup, all big companies that needs to sell to the bank has to start from zero. There is no historical data that Google or Baidu has before doesn't really help, right? In this case, it's NLP technology, it has to be used in that specific scenario that the banks wants. Sometimes they want it half automated, so that for the super VIP customers, they still hear a voice and not an automated system. And so in those verticals, just an example, in those verticals where content is specific, process is specific, I think this is where startups can actually get a head start. Because sometimes the market may look small to a bigger guy, and once you get to 70-80% market share, it's big, but it's too late for the big guys. And actually, if you look at the historical path that the larger guys have taken, they have never gone vertical. They always try to own the horizontal space first, from a technology perspective.
Okay. I want to ask one question that's actually not even related to startups. It's mainly purely selfish. Basically, I want to know what stocks I should buy tomorrow. But so basically, my question is: we've been talking about startups. We've been talking about and how they can compete on the.
Some advice. Probably not in public.
Great. Okay, we'll talk after this too. We have startups. We have large tech companies. All kind of have their angle on AI, but we know that AI is going to disrupt really all industries. S&P 500. Fortune 500 is full of traditional non-tech companies that are leaders in their category. How is this AI revolution going to impact these traditional leaders, and what does that mean for public markets?
So I think that if you look at where the big guys are going, this is not lost on them, right? They are either, just take the car industry, for example. The fact that you have GM acquiring Cruise, you have Ford investing in Argo, even the large guys, even the automotive OEMs, who takes 5 to 10 years to come out with a new car, is saying, I need to get smarter about this. And so either they are building in-house team, or they are announcing plans to invest, or they have made acquisition. So I actually think that this time around, I don't think the bigger guys are behind. I think they're actively thinking about how to engage. And this is happening not just in the US, but on a global basis as well.
Okay. So you spend a lot of time between US and China, as you've mentioned. How do you feel like AI is developing across those different ecosystems? Is one ahead of the other? What are the strengths of the two when it comes to AI?
Yeah, so I think that this is one area where I think both US and China will progress in very similar pace. The technology that's available, both US and China, actually in fact globally, is available to all, right? If it's open source, it isn't going to be restricted to geographic. And in this instance, I think the peculiar one is China. Once, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, the most common question that I get asked is whether there's innovation in China. It's like, Chinese startups are all copycats. Not really. So I think with going forward, China has a role to play for various reasons. The Chinese culture, I hate to say it, but I'm actually really good in math. I'm sure most of you are as well. And so, the Chinese way of learning math is actually really cool. For those of you interested, it's very good for like learning math, the Chinese language itself. And so as a result, years and years, it's there where Chinese tend to take out more research type work, more algorithms based, more computational. They're better in mathematics, right? So I'll cite a number which I shared with media earlier. If you look at the number of AI researchers globally, 20% of the AI researchers are Chinese. If you look at the number of citations that's been had for AI thesis algorithms, over 30% of all global citations comes from Chinese contributors. So they have inherently, this is playing to their core DNA, number one. So talent pool. Number two, when you look at the amount of data that's being generated, we talk a lot about data, right? While some you may have to learn from the scenario, some you can have historical, China has contributed to an explosion of this data. When you have 700-800 million users on WeChat, checking in 20 times a day, probably like 10 times while you're here, that's a lot of data. This is contextual, structured data that's being generated. China in last year actually generated about 10% of all global data, and by 2020 is expected to contribute over 15% of all global data. I think the number is 700 terabyte, huge number. So again, even if you just look at China itself, they have the ingredient, they have the talent, they have the data to actually try and solve problems. But I would say that if you're a startup, don't be fixated with geographic. If the problem that you're trying to solve is a global issue, then make sure that your team has the best of both worlds. Right? Today, it's not that difficult to hire and have an R&D center in China. It's not that difficult for a Chinese company to have an R&D center here in the US. Well, look at this space, right? Look at all the names. So this is again another testimony of Chinese startups, pitch for you, coming here for what? To hire talent as well. So I think if you're a startup, it's all about winning that game. And so if you can find the best talent composition, if that means going to China to hire, do it. By the way, I think Part.II has a lot of people looking for interesting ventures. So I would say leverage what you have, but it is going to be global competition.
So it does sound like between data, the advantage of data and talent, it sounds like you think that China actually has an advantage in this kind of new AI ecosystem.
I think that China and US will be at that level. US has a lot of great talent. In fact, a lot of the Chinese talent that I mentioned, whether it's the citation, whether it's the AI researcher, a lot of them are in the schools in the US. Right? These are guys who has PhD programs from CMU, from Stanford, MIT and the likes. And so I don't want to say that it's a geographic thing. I just want to say that maybe from if you're saying Chinese versus others, there is some inherent advantage there.
China and US are...
I'm not biased. I love both US and Chinese companies. It's more important about which one's going to win or whether they win.
Right. China and the US is still fairly two siloed tech ecosystems, right? It's relatively hard for Chinese companies to grow in the US. It's very hard for US companies, tech companies, to grow into China. Do you think this will change over time? Are they going to kind of converge, or will it stay two separate, distinct ecosystems?
So I think that that question has to change soon, because the answer is that it's actually not that difficult. So I think that technology is the great unifier between both the market, and I'll give you examples. Very early on, 10 years ago, in the internet world, when we said about exporting a business model overseas, the first type of companies that has made it successfully overseas are the tools companies. Right, so from China, for example, companies like UC Web that has a mobile browser, they are now number one in India. In fact, I think in the US it's quite high up there as well, definitely number one in China. So there's companies like Cheetah Mobile, so here I think, that when they started with their product, they actually went international first, very successful, got them public. So the first generation of companies are tools companies, because for the idea there is that if it's a tool, everybody uses the tool the same way. And so there's no localization, there's no context specific that needs to happen. But if you look at what's happening now, the market actually has shift for various reasons, right? So how many of you know Musical.ly? It's younger, more than I expected, right? So Musical.ly is an app that's top 5 or 10 in the US. Most of your kids may be using it, you may have to use it. This is done by a Chinese company. It's a Shanghai startup that did this product. They are now about to bring the product back to China, but they actually started in the US when the team was 100% still sitting in Shanghai. And the reason why this is an interesting one is because actually Musical.ly is a social product. And a lot of times when you think about social products, it should have a lot of localized features, localization that you think international competitors will not be able to understand, right? But it's a testimony that Musical.ly can make it in the US. And the reason why they can make it is this. Actually, consumers are getting more and more alike than different, right? There is a convergence of user interface, there is a convergence of user experience. Just as you use Uber in the US, you know how to use Uber or Didi in China. Just as you know how to use, just as you know how to play Angry Birds. Doesn't matter where you're sitting, it plays the same way. Think about the millennials. They have grown up in the last 15 years with internet. 17 years, right, starting in 2000. They have grown up with the last 10 years on the mobile phone. And interestingly, there's only two key operating systems, right? The iOS and Android. And so all the apps that's being downloaded, whether it's on a Xiaomi phone in China or an iPhone in the US, they look and feel the same. Right? You know how to press to delete the app. That's UI. Right? Think about how it's so hard for us to move from Office to Mac when you first make the transition, right? And then Mac starts to look more and more like Office. So I think that that's something that sometimes startups forget. Actually, the world has changed. They are no longer bipolar. They are no longer two geographic differences, because ultimately the consumers are getting more and more alike. So if you're looking at the consumer sector, I actually think that more and more cross-border models will work. Just as we have bicycle sharing in China, we now see it in the US. It's going the other way around. I think that the differences may occur more within the enterprise space, because I think that the way the US enterprise consume their product and their processes, that tend to be pretty different from China. And so in that situation, there may still be markets where, it's harder for US companies to localize enough in China, or for Chinese companies to bring their product to the international market. Probably not for the next 3 to 5 years.
When will we see the reverse of Musical.ly? A US social company that can go first to China before here, before even the US, like we saw with Musical.ly?
Yeah, I think the issue is not business model, the issue is fear.
And we thought that was funny, but...
It's fear. So if you look at China market and you said, this is a market that I need to be in, right? It's a market that's important. If I take on the China market, I'm gonna win. And you do whatever it takes. If the founder of Facebook can spend the last 7 years learning Chinese, including giving a full course in Chinese to Tsinghua University, that's commitment. So I actually think that first for CEOs, you have to get over that hurdle. After you get over that hurdle, then you decide, what's that product. And once you're all in the China market, you're going to decide. It may be finding the right local partner. It may be, acquiring a team. So there are different ways to then try to address this issue.
Right. So when is the right moment for startups like those in the room to be considering growing internationally? Not necessarily China included, but when should they be thinking about growing internationally?
So I want to give a different perspective. On the business model side, we have an interesting observation. So when because as you know, GGV, we look at US and Chinese companies, we notice that in the US, when user numbers climb and traffic goes up, the first reaction is, oh, let's monetize with ads. Let's just push ads. Why? Because in the US, you've had great companies really form because of ads, right? Whether it's Google or Facebook or Snapchat and the likes. The way, when you have traffic, you monetize with ads. Actually, that's a really roundabout way to monetize. If you really have a good product or services, your customer is going to pay. And so I think that if you look at China, interesting, I wouldn't say great disruption on the technology, but interesting business model disruption is that Chinese companies tend to think about, is this good enough for my consumer to buy? Whether they are paying for virtual currencies or virtual items, whether they are paying for subscription-based, it's all about getting them the right user experience, and so consumers will pay. So if you are in the US and you are saying, hey, I really don't like the ad model, and you have some ways to integrate, whether it's gamification, consumerization, into your product has a better way to monetize. Because if you're only reliant on ads, it's actually a very localized market. Because the ad agencies, the ad buyers, if they are buying a product, they want US traffic, they're only buying US traffic. Whereas if you develop a product that's for the consumer, and if you agree with me that consumers are actually unifying very quickly, then that same product can scale. Give it another year or two, US will all be about live streaming. Right now it's red hot in China. Every single vertical, from singing to entertainment to music to news to finance to sports, is actually happening. And I think it will happen here. And in that live streaming model, it's all about the consumer.
It's interesting. Honestly, I haven't ever heard this perspective of consumers somehow merging, especially between China and the US, so that's some really interesting perspectives. Now I will have time to, we have about 15 minutes or so to open it up to questions. So raise your hand, Ryan will bring you the microphone, stand up, tell your name and your company, and a brief question.
It's me, Nicole, again. So I still want to ask about the sharing economics thing, like the bicycle. Just now you mentioned that for startups, what you really need is to solve the problems that exist. So, but right now, the bicycle sharing is creating problems in China. It's blocking the roads, and it's lots of the bikes are missing. So, I don't know why do you still see the merits inside of this business?
Yeah, so if you're an entrepreneur, you have to see a glass half full, not half empty. So I think when you think about the ride-sharing business, I want to highlight this. In China right now, on a daily basis, there are more than 20 million bikes. Actually, summer it goes up more, being used every day. What does that mean? It's not 200, it's 20 million. There are 20 million people at least taking the bike ride once a day. That's a huge need, right? Whether the bikes are dirty and it's being damaged, those are operational issues that over time will have to be cleaned up, whether it's through regulation. So the city may say only 3 bikes are allowed, 3 colors, maybe 1 bike are allowed. So I like the fact that regulation does the regulation part later, not before. For countries that regulate first, speaks later, there's no innovation. For countries that says, let's have innovation first and then we regulate to make sure that this is sustainable, I think it's a very important consideration. So I think number one, the need is there. Why is the need there? So not everybody can afford a 4-wheel, DD ride, right? The average fee is, 11, 15 RMB as a get-go. There are workers, There are people out there bringing their kids to school. The transportation range may be between 1 to 3 to 8 kilometers, right? In the past, they walk. They walk in the sun, they walk in the rain. With a bike, they can bike, right? And so the bike sharing actually reaches to a level of consumer that is not in the middle to high-end class. It's actually the mass market, and that's where the need is. The penetration of bike sharing in China, I think, is not even at 30%, and you have 20 million rides a day. So it has to be a need. Now, if you're a startup trying to do this, you have to ask yourself what's your unique advantage. Because this is a model that's all about scale. And part of that scale means also financing capability. So if you are behind the game and you have no specific advantage to add to this is not where you should be playing your startup, right? Go somewhere else. So I think, again, timing of how you pick that startup is very important. But I just want to address the issue that in all new disruption that happens, there will be chaos first, and then peace. So if you're a startup, if you're a founder, you have to learn to work with chaos. If you cannot handle chaos, then startup is not for you.
Let me tag along on the question. I think many of us saw Mobike raise 600 million yesterday. And so I think a lot of that is earmarked for international growth. And you mentioned that transportation is one of your focuses. So I don't think GGV was in that deal. And I think you've made, I've talked with Hans about it recently, GGV's made a small investment in another company, another bike sharing company, but not a major investment. So what is your outlook for these companies' ability to grow outside of China, where they do have that incredible population density that makes any of these sort of sharing models work really well?
So this industry, this business model is actually at a tipping point right now. So in China, it's a strategic moment. You cannot ignore that when you have 20, 30 million rides a day, that's 20 to 30 million transactions a day. So the competition in China is actually no longer just about capital, about replicating their model, no longer about team. There is huge strategic value to the big guys. So we call it now, it's a fight of the gods, BATs, the gods. So they are the ones that's financing companies, whether it's OFO or Mobike, because they see the strategic value of having this high frequency transaction use case within the app. The fact that, of course, the two companies are slightly different. The fact that you can have data, like within the app, structured data as to where that person is, what kind of route they have taken, that's again additional data. So the fight has gone on a strategic level. I think the capital is as much for international expansion as for saying, hey, I have a big guy, all your young kids, go away. So it's a little bit of that situation, very similar to what Didi and Kuaidi did, almost 2 years ago now. So that's how competition has evolved. So for us, we have companies, some of whom, one of them actually has pivoted into the space, and they see this need. The way they compete is actually not go head to head with the big guys in the major cities. Another stats for you. In China, there are over 220 cities with over 1 million in population. 85 with 5 million. With 85 cities with 5 million in population. So if you cannot fight the battle with the 85 cities, 5 million, you still have a choice of 220 cities. San Francisco is about 500,000. So I think that that's competition as well. That I think startups you have to think about. Sometimes it's not competing on the same geographic plane, but you have other cities that you can go after.
Hi, Mary from External Health. I had a question for companies or founders who are interested in the Chinese market. You mentioned you have to find the right partner. How do you go? Who is that right partner, and how do you go about finding it? We are in the healthcare space, but in general, as
yeah. So it's actually more specific than general. For example, if you're in the medical equipment space and your equipment has FDA, certification, CE mark, then for you to enter China, you need to have similar FSDA approval, for example, right? So again, I think different industries will be different. Now, if that's indeed is the case, then before you even find a partner, the key question is, can you get FSDA? So the right type of partner would then be people, channels, distributors, folks who can actually help you understand the FSDA process. And first of all, decide if you even have the license to play, right? So if you don't have the license to play, it's not the right market for you. But if you don't need that type of license, it's more about localizing your app or your content, then I think your first most important task is to make sure you have the right team. Because ultimately the use case is different, the process is different. You need to have someone living in China who can understand this and help you to localize that product. So you can get to that talent, whether it's by recruiting or it could be acquisition. If you're large enough of a company outside, so in areas other than AI areas, it's not 1 million for every year of experience. So it's slightly better.
Hi, my name is Brady Simpson. I'm from a consumer hardware startup. You said an interesting comment about chaos and disruption and innovation before regulation. When you're thinking about the autonomous driving space, what is the right approach here? And kind of what are your thoughts on how traditional companies like Uber and Waymo are tackling it?
So that's a very interesting space. I think that it's a space where if you look at it right now, when it first came out, it was a bunch of startups trying to use CVE, computer vision, to try and assess how you do assisted drive, right? Whether it's L2, L3, or L4. And this was all happening in the labs. Companies were putting out cars out there. Obviously, Google, in the US, you have Google, right? So Google lead the way, and they kind of help and work with the regulators in terms of what's required. Where if you need to have a car on the road, you need to have a safety driver, and then over time, you see the state coming in to say that, hey, you do need to have a license, right? You need to apply for a license if you're going to put your car on the road for testing. So it's one where, in this case, there was no regulation. I think the regulators has to figure out what to do. But as they see companies getting into it, and hopefully in the US, you guys have big companies leading the way, it helps to set the stage a little bit more. In China, it's a national initiative, right? So in China, half of China's GDP goes to either the automotive sector or the real estate sector. So automotive and real estate makes up over 50% of China's GDP. So it's a huge sector. So it's a sector where the Chinese government, in this case, understands it, but they haven't regulated. What they did say is that if you're Beijing, you're not allowed to have a car out there within the 5-ring road, because that's dangerous. There are a lot of people in Beijing, right? You're gonna crash. So they have simple rules first, but I think over time, they are probably gonna adopt a situation where you're gonna have to apply for a test license to do this. So I think maybe another parallel, give you some sense. So drones. We have consumers' drones flying everywhere, right? Now everybody's like, oh, the drone's gonna drop on my house. So what happens? For the longest time, the US government didn't do anything, right? They said if this drone is of a small size, it flies short range, within line of sight, okay. And then somewhere last year, they decided that there's too many drones out there, right? Actually, there's not that many drones. DJI, which is the #1 player globally, last year sold maybe 1.5 million, 1.5 million globally, and that's, I'm giving the high end of the stats. That's globally, and they own about 70% of the market. So say, the market is 2 million drones. That's not a lot compared to our 7 billion of population, right? But still, because you start to see issues like that, the US government basically said, hey, now you need to register. If you're using the drone for industrial application, you got to be registered as a flyer. Actually, so this was last year for the US. This year in China, about 2 months ago, China came out with a similar regulation that says, because China was starting to see drones being used for agriculture, for a whole bunch of stuff. And so, the Chinese government is also taking now a step to try and regulate. So that's the case where you have disruption that's happening. The government has to catch up. But I think it's great that they allow the flyers to go out there, see what kind of issues can be created before they regulate, so that the regulation can address that problem that they're trying to solve.
Hi, my name is Catherine. I'm a company called MarketX, and I have 2 questions. The first question is about fintech development in China versus fintech development for the rest of the world. And the second question is for a company that's US based, trying to pursue the Chinese market, do you recommend picking leading investors, like, lead investor for the company in China with a strategic brand, or do you recommend picking a lead investor in the US? Thanks.
So two questions, right? One, the fintech, and then second, picking the investor. So I guess I'm supposed to be an expert in all sectors, right? Which I happen to be. So I think on the fintech sector, this is a sector that is a little different. I actually cover fintech. Haven't done as much in the US, but in China, it's a huge industry. We call it fintech, or we call it internet finance. It's a huge archaic industry as well, whether it's from the banks, the security houses, where this were mostly state-owned. And over time, it's been a little bit more privatized, but there hasn't been a lot of innovation. And so there is, over the last 2 years, we have seen all kinds of P2P pop out in China, from short microloans to long microloans to consumer loans to asset-backed loans, P2P area. This is an area where, interestingly, regulation hasn't caught up. Over the last 2 to 3 years, the government used little guidelines. They have little guidelines out there, but no real specific restrictive regulation to stem out the innovation in the sector. So I think the regulatory regime is actually positive and supportive. Two, a lot of new internet guys are getting into the finance game with new products. Guess what? Like in China, you can get consumer credit not because you have credit card scoring, but because you have what they call 芝麻信用, right? Like the sesame credit, this is like from Alibaba. So if you buy enough e-commerce products from Alibaba, you have a consumer rating to see how good you are. And so, or you can also leverage social standing. If you have X number of WeChat friends, and these are all the top-notch, better of the world, you may have like an 80% credit scoring because your friends are good. You have to be pretty good too. So these are innovative products that the Chinese startups think about, right? And so that's where I actually see a lot of innovation all through the value system. Product first, and then address the internet finance issue. In the US, I haven't seen as much innovation, to be fair. I have seen a bit more traditional model, the lending club model, the SoFi model for loans, a little bit more, I think there is a page to learn from what has happened in China to see the Musical.ly story, to see if there are ways to modify some of those products to actually disrupt the US market. So I think there's both ways. And then I think investors, at the end, so fundraising. So fundraising is a problem that all startups have to face. First, you've got to decide, do you need funds to survive? Best if you don't. Self-survival is always the best startup. Now, if you do, then you've got to figure out, like where you want to start, how you want to start. If your team, and so very early on at the C to early A round, I would advise you to find local investors. And I think it's because you have in your universe, you're building your team, you're trying to figure out your product, you're trying to figure out your technology. Having investors who's in the same kind of location or same time zone actually helps you. Because if you find the right investor, that early investor can give you a lot of guidance in terms of which direction to go. Now, if you're only looking for capital, then any capital doesn't matter, right? You can get it from anywhere. As your company grows, if you get into a Series A, Series B, if international is a big objective of yours, then having the right cross-border investors actually is very important. Because as you take your first step out, you don't want to be sitting in Series B or at IPO, and you said, I want to go to China, and your board members have never been to China. That's fear. Because naturally, they're going to say, no, let's go make a trip first. So I think that as you grow your business, different stages, how you construct the board has to also mirror how you want to address your international market. If you're going to be local, I think go for the local folks that you relate to best. But if you have international ambition, at some point, surround yourself. They may not be board members initially, but surround yourself with advisors. They can also be advisors, right, who can help you think through international market expansion.
I heard that might be the last question, so I'll try to make it really good. Actually, kind of a provocative question. Heard a lot of talk tonight about AI and your transportation focus as well, as we've seen a number of companies focusing in automated travel, personal human transportation, drones, other types of applications. The provocative question is, we've been moving people for hundreds of years, actually thousands of years. Now that we have technology in the name of VR and AR, is this a peak? At some point, do people stop moving because we have massive social networks and the ability to create AR, VR environments that are very compelling, ability to map and street view to micro detail? Do people stop traveling and we only move goods around and people don't move anymore, which would create massive shifts in how you commercialize any sort of business model? I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Actually, I keep asking myself this question as well. And by the way, I'm actually not bullish about AR and VR. Then we can talk about it, different topic. So I think that if you read the origin of humankind, we are born to migrate. We are born to move. Across history, some of the biggest problems that we have solved is around transportation. How do you get from one point to the other? When you're in the village, thousands of years ago, you want to cross that mountain. You do it by foot, or you try and come up with better ways, right? Whether it's with horse carriage, or with cars, or with planes. So actually what I want to say is that the essence of, some of you may be philosophers, right? I'm not, but I think humans exist for different reasons, right? One of the biggest emotional thing is connections, interconnections. And to be only interconnect on a virtual basis, I think it doesn't work for maybe 90% of the population. So it's a belief as to, will humans all become like Matrix, where we only live in our mind and not move. But my fundamental belief is that as more and more products get online, as more and more services get delivered to your home, actually loneliness goes up. The search for happiness means you need more interconnection, which is why online is now going offline, which is why Amazon buys Whole Foods. So if you guys are watching, O2O it's going the other way. It's actually going from online to offline. Xiaomi now has stores, you can go check out your stuff, right? So it's actually reversing, because as the need for virtual satisfaction gets accomplished, people are now searching for more interconnection offline. Again, philosophy question, which we can talk about later.
Okay, last question.
All right, here comes our last question. Hi, my name is Tassilo. I actually do VR. We use it to heal pain, so that's probably something different. But my question is really about what I perceive to be sort of almost a barrage of Chinese investors coming to the Bay Area and trying to figure out who are the right investors, because it's often very difficult for a small company to have any sense of who these people are, and often it feels like they come like a tour bus.
Sometimes.
Actually, I think they are a tour bus. So for those of you who are not aware, right? So there are some fundamental drivers that's driving outflow of RMB or US dollar into the overseas market. So the RMB depreciation means that if you're in China and your net wealth is only denominated in RMB, there is a frantic need to try and diversify that risk, right? So, what that risk translates into is that if there's any way for them to buy a house in the US, send their kids overseas, come invest in technology and cool stuff, that's what they're going to do. So that to them is what they feel has a way of diversifying their currency reliance and also China-specific risk. So that's the driver that's happening. In China, the capital market is not as developed as the US, which is another topic. Over the last 17 years, the regulators have shut down the IPO like over 20 times. Like in China, the regulators can shut down IPO market. It's basically no IPOs for the next 3 months, right? So the market is not very developed. And so even if you have a lot of capital and you bought up all the homes in China, there's not a lot of places that you can go. Beyond homes and stock market, it's overseas. So that's that drive. That's number one. Number two, you're in the VR space. VR is great for immersive experience, whether it's in gaming, which is now mostly used, and then maybe in different travel situations. That is a sector that requires hardware and software integration. The Chinese investors in general are not afraid of hardware. You will notice that a lot of Magic Leap of the world, like the hardware-based companies, robotics companies in the US, they actually do get following in China because of China's roots, right? The fact that China has seen products being made, some of them made their wealth from building factories and running factories, right? The Foxconn of the world. And so that fear to say, oh, it has to be software, it has to be core, it's not there. For them, they actually feel more comfortable seeing a hardware product. Show them a server farm, right, with racks, versus this is my core software. So again, that's a little bit of that going on, where if you are comparing between US investors and China investors do, when they do make that check, they want to know that they can see the physical product. Now, but which investors you should use, there's a whole gamut, right? So you have the BATs, so the big strategic guys are also placing bets and buying companies in the US. You have the individuals who are trying to diversify, and sometimes they are not from the non-tech industries, and so they may not understand what you're doing, but they have loads of cash. And then there are investors, there are R&B investors who have R&B funds, but trying to diversify their funds. So you do have to be very prudent, do make that due diligence call, ask around. I think, Barrett's team has been in China how many times? 4 times a year at least. And over the years, a few hundred times. So there are investors, there are fellow, people here who actually knows China. So make sure you do the right due diligence. Make sure you understand where that money is coming from. Make sure that money can get out. They tell you they have loads of RMB. Right now, it's really hard to convert RMB to US dollar. So they may commit, but they may not close. So I think those are the risks. But money is money. If you need to survive, make sure you do your work and then find the best of the lot.
All right, that concludes the fireside chat. Let's give a round of applause to Jenny and Barrett. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Also to our